Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back to Guys at Magic. It's me, it's Steven, coming at you with another deck tech. Gonna go ahead and be talking about Kibo, Uktabi Prince. I'm not gonna lie to you guys, I wasn't super thrilled on this card when we first saw it, when we were doing like spoilers and stuff like that. But after like sitting down with the deck and spending some time going over some strategies and some cool stuff you can do, this deck actually kind of grew on me. I'm not gonna lie to you. I was actually really impressed with how it runs and what we're gonna be able to do with it. So without further ado, let's get into the video. But before we go in, while I have your attention, I want you guys to do me a favor and go show the video some love. Give it a like. If you like what we do here at Guys at Magic, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. We greatly do appreciate all you guys constantly watching, constantly giving us comments and critiques and feedback. We love it. But the first thing I want to do is I want to talk about Kibo, so let's go ahead. Kibo Uktabi Prince is 2 colorless and a green for a legendary creature, Monkey Noble. You can tap it. Each player creates a colorless artifact token named Banana. It has tap it, sacrifice this artifact for either a red or green. You gain 2 life. It also has, whenever an artifact an opponent controls is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control that is an ape or a monkey. And the last ability Kibo has is whenever Kibo attacks, defending player sacrifices an artifact. So really fun card. Don't really like the fact that we're going to be giving our opponents treasures, essentially. Obviously, they can't sack for any kind of mana, but red and green. They do gain 2 life, which isn't fun. But we're in Gruul here, so we're in green-red. We're going to be doing Gruul things. We're going to be hurting people. We're going to be swinging with some massive creatures because Kibo's going to be putting these +1/+1 counters on our creatures that are apes and monkeys. And then we're going to be destroying some artifacts. So we're going to start slowly hurting our opponents and really affecting their board state as much as we can. So let's get into the deck. First thing I want to talk about is I threw in 1 Planeswalker. And what is an artifact themed deck without Karn the Great Creator? 4 colorless for legendary Planeswalker. Has a static ability that says activated abilities of artifacts your opponent's control can't be activated. So we give them a banana and they can't use it. That's my favorite part. Also has +1 until your next turn. Up to 1 target non-creature artifact becomes an artifact creature with power and toughness equal to its converted mana cost. It has a -2 that says you may choose an artifact card you own from outside the game or in exile, reveal that card, and put it into your hand. We're not really looking at the -2 here. So we're really only looking at that static ability, and we're looking at that +1 pretty hard. It has a starting loyalty of 5, which is going to be really solid. So pretty much with Karn in this deck, there's a slight artifact destruction sub-theme. Pretty hard, I'm not going to lie to you. So us being able to make non-creature artifacts become artifacts, we're going to start destroying a lot of stuff. So really love this card. Now let's go ahead and dive into the creature base a little bit. I went ahead and split this up into 3 different categories. So I split it up into our creatures that are not monkeys, not apes. I split it up into our ape and monkeys that are going to kind of help us out. And then the last group will be the apes and monkeys that really do the deck justice. So first creatures we'll talk about are the non-monkey and apes. First creature we have up is Tyrant Guard. X, 2 colorless and a green. It has Ravenous. This creature enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it, and then if X is 5 or more, draw a card when it enters. Really love the Ravenous abilities on all these cards from the Warhammer 40k precons. Drawing us a card is really amazing, and the fact that we can pump this up on our own is even better. But the main reason why I put this card in here was because we can sacrifice this card, and creatures we control with counters on them gain hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. Obviously, with this deck, we're going to be building a board state like no other because we're amazing and people are going to want to destroy it. So this is definitely going to help us out. Sardian Avenger, 1 colorless and a red. It has first strike and trample. Whenever Sardian Avenger attacks, it gets +X/+0 until end of turn, where X is the number of artifacts your opponents control. Whenever an artifact an opponent controls is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, Sardian Avenger deals 1 damage to that player. So we're going to be helping them out by getting them bananas, and then we're going to be using those bananas to strike them down. Really do love that second ability as well, because essentially with Kibo swinging in or any artifact destruction means that we have in this deck, this is almost like a kind of like a pseudo blood artist without the life gain. We're going to be pinging opponents down, which is going to be really nice. We have Quicksmith Genius, 2 colorless and a red. Whenever an artifact enters the battlefield under your control, you may discard a card. If you do draw a card, I love to rummage. Drawing cards, I tell you 1,000 times in these videos, wins you the game. And especially if you have something in your hand that's not going to really help you out in that time, Quicksmith Genius is definitely going to help you out. Dusk Shell Crawler is another card I added. It is a colorless and a green. When it enters the battlefield, you put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. Each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it has trample. Massive. Insane. Granted, this is a 0/3, so essentially you can kind of consider this, maybe a defender. But it comes in, you can put a +1/+1 counter on anything you want, and then that card now has trample. I love it. Also threw in Kodama of the West Tree, 2 colorless and a green. It has reach. Modified creatures you control have trample. Love the trample. Whenever a modified creature you control deals combat damage to a player, search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. I think if you're doing any kind of sub-theme in green and you have +1/+1 creatures, or that's basically the deck you're building, Kodama of the West Tree is the card you need to throw in your deck. So the fact that this whole deck is basically built around getting our creatures as big as possible with +1/+1s, swinging in, giving them trample. I want as many lands on my field as possible because I'm going to ruin someone's day with this deck. We also have Jolene the Plunder Queen. 2 colorless, a red and a green. Whenever a player attacks one or more of your opponents, that attacking player creates a treasure token. If you would create one or more treasure tokens, instead create those tokens plus an additional treasure token. You can sacrifice 5 treasures, put 5 +1/+1 counters on Jolene. I don't really like the last ability. I mean, obviously, putting 5 +1/+1 counters is really amazing, but I don't really think we want to sack 5 treasures to do that. Obviously, since we can do some other fun stuff, but really the reason why I like this card is A, we're creating more treasures for ourselves. Yes, we're technically giving treasures to our opponents, but this is kind of an incentive for people to not mess with us and hopefully start attacking other people while we constantly build up our board state and then take over the game. Next up, we have Goblin Anarchomancer. It is a red and a green. Each spell you cast that's red or green costs 1 less to cast. Granted, not everything in this deck is terribly beefy when it comes to mana. Some of the cards we do have are, but at the end of the day, cost reduction is cost reduction, and I'll take it any way I can get it, and this card was really fun. We have Kavu Predator. It is 1 colorless and a green. It has trample. Whenever an opponent gains life, put that many +1/+1 counters on Kavu Predator. With Kibo giving them bananas, if we don't destroy those bananas in time and they gain 2 life when they sack them, obviously Kavu Predator is going to be pretty cool. I also added Defiler of Vigor. It is 3 colorless and 2 green. It has trample. As an additional cost, to cast green permanent spells, you may pay 2 life. Those spells cost green less to cast if you paid life this way. This effect reduces only the amount of green mana you pay. Whenever you cast a green permanent spell, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. A lot of fun stuff here. I do love the fact that we can kind of do like the Phyrexian pay life thing with our green permanent spells. And the fact that when we do cast these green permanent spells, we put a +1/+1 counter onto everything. So these creatures all together, giving trample, giving +1/+1 counters, the cost reduction, getting us land, indestructible. I think that the package here was really amazing. But you can't complete a package without the final card, right? So the final card I threw in was Dockside Extortionist. So a colorless and a red, when Dockside Extortionist enters the battlefield, create X treasure tokens where X is the number of artifacts and enchantments your opponents control. I love this card. This card comes down, we make a ton of treasures, we can use those treasures to then take over the game and rule the world. All right, moving on to the second group of creatures. These creatures are basically creatures that are in the deck because they're apes and monkeys. They have some really cool abilities and they're going to help us grow our board state by basically getting big and massive whenever Kibo attacks. So we'll go ahead and start off with Willy Bander. It is 1 green. It is a 1/1, and then it has pay 2 colorless and a green, and it gains indestructible until end of turn. 1 mana 1/1 can become indestructible when it's really big, and then those +1/+1 counters with all the trample stuff we were talking about earlier, going to be really fun. Tree Monkey is also in the deck for 1 green. It's also a 1/1. Tree Monkey can block as though it had flying. So essentially we have reach before it was reach. Scrounging Bander, 1 colorless and a green. Scrounging Bander enters the battlefield with 2 +1/+1 counters on it. And also at the beginning of your upkeep, you may move any number of +1/+1 counters from Scrounging Bander onto another target creature. Really cool ability. So basically on your upkeep, you can give something modified. You can make it with trample if we have some kind of other effects on the board. I thought this was a really cool card, especially for 2. We also have Metallic Mimic, 2 colorless. As Metallic Mimic enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. Metallic Mimic is the chosen type in addition to its other types. Each other creature you control of the chosen type enters the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. This card's really cool because it could really be whatever you want it to be in the instance. If you have a lot of monkeys in your hand, you can go ahead and play this as a monkey, so that way they can start coming down with those extra +1s. And then same thing goes for apes. So you can really use this card to your heart's desire. We have Grun the Lonely King. Shout out Shane. He used this in a random rumble. That was really fun. 4 colorless, 2 green. It has kicker 3, so you can pay an additional 3 as you cast a spell. If Grun the Lonely King was kicked, it enters the battlefield with 5 +1/+1 counters on it, and then whenever Grun attacks alone, double its power and toughness until the end of turn. So it starts off as a 5/5, which you're paying 6 mana for, and then if you're paying the additional 3, it's going to cost you 9 mana total to play this card. But the fact that we're going to be putting a bunch of +1/+1 counters, and if we double this with all those counters on it, and it has trample, it's going to be a bad day for somebody. I also added Tauren Mauler, 2 colorless and a red. It's a changeling. So, even though it's a bull, it can also be a monkey or an ape. But really fun card because your opponents are working for you at this point. Whenever an opponent casts a spell, you may put a +1/+1 counter on Tauren Mauler. Any spell. Whatever they want. Creatures, non-creatures. Whatever they play, it's getting big. We also have Simeon Simulacrum. 3 colorless. Whenever this enters the battlefield, put 2 +1/+1 counters on target creature you control. It also has Unearth for 2 and a green. Unearth, if you don't know, if this is in your graveyard, you can pay that cost. It comes into the battlefield with haste, and then you sacrifice it at the end of your next end step. Starts off as a 2/1, so technically you can give this card the 2 +1/+1 counters, or you can kind of distribute them around. It's going to be fun either way. I also have Curd Ape. It is 1 red. Curd Ape gets +1/+2 as long as you control a forest. So in all honesty, we're never not going to have a forest, so this card itself will be a 2/3 pretty much the majority of the time it's on the field. We also have Hooting Mandrills. It is 5 colorless and a green for a 4/4. It has Delve. Delve says each card you exile from your graveyard while casting the spell pays for 1 colorless. It has Trample. So after a certain amount of time, we'll have some cards in our graveyard. We can use, those cards to basically make this super cheap. And I really like that. We also added Gorilla Chieftain. 2 colorless and 2 green. You can pay 1 colorless and a green to regenerate Gorilla Chieftain. It's a 3/3, and the fact that it's able to regenerate itself is amazing. And the fact that it's only going to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and we get to regenerate it constantly will be amazing. And the last card I want to talk about in our Monkey Ape section is going to be Ragavan Nimble Pilferer. It is 1 red. Whenever Ragavan Nimble Pilferer deals combat damage to a player, create a treasure token and exile the top card of that player's library. Until end of turn, you may cast that card. It also has Dash for a colorless and a red. Dash, if you don't know, you may cast a spell for its dash cost. If you do, it gains haste, and it's returned from the battlefield to its owner's hand at the beginning of the next end step. So, really fun card. I think Ragavan's amazing and really deserves to be in a lot of decks. Unfortunately, it is quite expensive, but we were able to fit it in this deck with our budget. But to be able to either play this turn 1 and then start swinging in, creating treasures, really jumping ahead of the game, or whether we're trying to dash this in when nobody has something on the field after a board wipe or something like that, and we can basically swing and create a treasure and then start utilizing our opponent's decks to our advantage, I think is really cool. And we'll move on to the last section of creatures. These are the creatures that really hurt our opponents, so I wanted to talk about these in particular all together. So we do have Yavimaya Steel Crusher. It is a colorless and a red. It has Enlist, so basically as this creature attacks, you may tap a non-attacking creature you control without summoning sickness. When you do, add its power to this creature until end of turn. So this can get really big, really scary, really quickly, depending on what we got going on. But the ability I love the most on this card is you can pay 1, you can sacrifice it, you can destroy target artifact. So a 2-mana 2/2 that gets really big, and then you can pay 1 more to destroy a target artifact is amazing. So if anybody's trying to wipe our board and we don't have any protection, boom. We're just going to sacrifice this. We're going to pay that 1, and we're going to ruin that person's side of the board that wanted to hurt us. Why would they hurt us? They know we're trying to win. I don't understand. We also have Uktabi Orangutan. It is 2 colorless and a green. And then when it enters the battlefield, destroy target artifact. A 3-mana 2/2 that destroys target artifact on wherever you want is amazing. So definitely an include here. We also have Silverback Elder. It is 2 colorless and 3 green. It has whenever you cast a creature spell, choose 1. Destroy target artifact or enchantment. Look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may put a land card from among them onto the battlefield tapped. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. And then it also has you gain 4 life. So really 3 awesome modes here for a 5/7 for 5 mana. And then when you cast more stuff, specifically creatures obviously, but you're destroying target enchantments or artifacts, you're ruining somebody's day, maybe you need the life gain, or if you're trying to find a mana drop, you can just go ahead and put it on the field. And then one of the cards that I added that is not a ape or shaman is going to be a Manglehorn. It is 2 colorless and a green. When it enters the battlefield, you may destroy target artifact. And then it has a really fun one that says artifacts your opponents control enter the battlefield tapped. So if they're trying to play Soul Ring a little later in the game or an Arcane Signet, I don't want you using it right away. You're going to have to wait a turn. I also added Kogla, the Titan Ape, 3 colorless and 3 green. When Kogla, the Titan Ape, enters the battlefield, it fights up to 1 target creature you don't control. Whenever Kogla attacks, destroy target artifact or enchantment defending player controls. It also has, for a colorless and a green, you can return target human you control to its owner's hand. Kogla gains indestructible until end of turn. We're really not looking at that third ability, if I'm being honest with you. It is just generally the first 2. Kogla is a 7/6, so it fighting 1 target creature is basically a creature destruction in Commander, I feel like. And then obviously when this card attacks, it's gonna hurt somebody's board, which is always my favorite thing. And lastly, we have Gorilla Shaman. It is a red. It has XX1. Destroy target non-creature artifact with mana value X. So a little costly into the double X cost, but I mean, to be honest with you, we're really just probably trying to get rid of cards that are being a little bit too much value for our opponents. So this card was a really good add. And that sums up the creatures. I really do love the creature package we put in here. We do have a total of 27 creatures, and I think all 27 deserve a spot in this list. Let's go ahead and jump into our sorceries now. I pretty much put this into 2 different categories. So we pretty much have our ramp and our destruction. So our ramp, we'll go ahead and jump into first. We have Nature's Lore. Search your library for a forest card, put that card onto the battlefield, then shuffle. It is 1 colorless and a green. Really good card. You really can't go wrong. Kodama's Reach, 2 colorless and a green. Search your library for 2 basic land cards, reveal those cards, put 1 onto the battlefield tapped, the other into your hand, then shuffle. And then you have Cultivate, basically the same thing. Search your library for up to 2 basic land cards, reveal those cards, put 1 onto the battlefield tapped and the other into your hand, then shuffle. That is also 2 colorless and a green. All right, and then next on our sorcery list, we do have all the fun destruction stuff. So we have a Vandal Blast for a red. It has destroy target artifact you don't control. It also has Overload. It has 4 colorless and a red. When you pay that, you basically change the text by replacing all instances of target with each. So it changes the text to destroy each artifact you don't control. So massive board wipe for all artifacts on the field. We'll get into why that's really cool a little later. Next up, we have Shattering Spree for 1 red. It says destroy target artifact. It also says replicate for 1 red. When you play this spell, copy it for each time you paid its replicate cost. You may choose new targets for the copies. So essentially, for a bunch of red mana, we're going to destroy a lot of artifacts. Really helps with our commander. It really helps with the synergy of the deck. It's going to be really fun. Next up, we have Echoing Ruin for 1 colorless and a red. It has destroy target artifact and all other artifacts with the same name as that artifact. I know what you're thinking. Why are we throwing a card that says same name in Commander when everything has to be different? I threw in a couple cards that might make that more relevant, so we'll get into that a little bit later. But I also added Decimate for 2 colorless, a red and a green. You have destroy target artifact, target creature, target enchantment, and target land. This card is amazing. I love it. It really does what the card name is. It decimates somebody's side of the board, or you can spread the love, to be quite honest with you as well. I also added Brother's End. It is a colorless and 2 red. You can choose one. Brother's End deals 3 damage to each creature and each planeswalker, or you can also choose destroy all artifacts with mana value 3 or less. So whether you're trying to get rid of a board state of some small creatures, or you're just trying to wipe the board of all artifacts, this card's really amazing. And then the last card that I added was Blasphemous Act. It is 8 colorless and a red. You will never pay 9 mana for this card, but this spell does cost 1 less to cast for each creature on the battlefield, so that's why I said that. Blasphemous Act deals 13 damage to each creature. So could possibly wipe our own board unless we did a really amazing job and all of our monkeys and apes are massive, which at that point you don't really need Blasphemous Act because you're pretty much winning the game already, but always fun. You can't go wrong. All right, well, those were all the sorceries. Let's go ahead and move on to our instant spells. First thing we'll talk about will be some removal spells. First thing we'll talk about is Shrapnel Blast. It is a colorless and a red. As an additional cost to cast the spell, sacrifice an artifact. Shrapnel Blast deals 5 damage to any target. Fun fact, we have, artifact creation in the deck, so it shouldn't be that hard to do this. Also have Chaos Warp, always a fun one. 2 colorless and a red. The owner of target permanent shuffles it into their library, then reveals the top card of their library. If it's a permanent card, they put it onto the battlefield. So this one's always kind of like a little bit of a gamble. You can even do this to your own stuff, to be honest with you. If there's a card on your field that's not doing it for you, you can go ahead and Chaos Warp it, try and get something else from the top of your library, get a little lucky. Or if your opponents have, an artifact, a land, a creature, or an enchantment that you don't like, you can shuffle it back into their library and they can get the top card. But there's a chance that they might put something down that's scarier than what it was. So, hazard warning. And then lastly, we have Beast Within for 2 colorless and a green. Destroy target permanent. Its controller creates a 3/3 green beast creature token. So, don't like something? Kill it. Make it something you can kill later. And then the last few instances we added into the deck were basically for card draw. Like I said earlier, I preach it enough at this point, but card draw wins you games. The more cards you're able to draw, the deeper into the deck you are, it really does help you. So I added Benefactor's Drought. It is a colorless and a green. Untap all creatures. Until end of turn, whenever a creature an opponent controls blocks, draw a card. And then you can just draw a card. So we're basically drawing cards whenever opponent's creatures block. And then we're just going to draw a card just for, 2 mana. So 2 mana, draw 1, and then hopefully you're drawing a bunch of cards because your opponent's got to block your big creatures. It's always a good time. We have Inspiring Call. It is 2 colorless and a green. Draw a card for each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it. Those creatures gain indestructible until end of turn. So, funny enough, our deck revolves around putting +1/+1 counters on stuff. Not only that, but this also makes everything indestructible. So, good luck trying to board wipe me, nerd. And then the last instant spell we have in here is Return of the Wild Speaker. It is 4 colorless and a green. Choose one. Draw cards equal to the greatest power among non-human creatures you control, or non-human creatures you control get +3/+3 until end of turn. Either or, whichever decision you make on this card will be fun. So either you're drawing a bunch of cards or you're making such a large board state that it's nuts. So declare your attackers. They don't declare blockers. You got 5 mana up. Ruin somebody's day. Please. It made me happy. Tell me stories about it. Put it in the comments. And that'll pretty much wrap up all the instant spells that we added in here. We're going to go ahead and get into our artifact package. I'm going to go ahead and talk about 4 cards in particular really quickly, which are going to be really fun for us. Because I kind of hinted at it a little bit earlier with the Echoing Ruin that we added into the deck. But those 4 cards, we'll go ahead and throw them up on the screen now. We have Maskwood Nexus, Mycosynth Lattice, Liquid Metal Coating, and Liquid Metal Torque. So first card we'll talk about will be Mycosynth Lattice. It is 6 colorless. All permanents are artifacts in addition to their other types. All cards that aren't on the battlefield, spells, and permanents are colorless. Players may spend mana as though it were mana of any color. So this card's really fun because it basically makes all permanents artifacts in addition to their other types. Funny enough, it says permanents, which means lands. So essentially, if your opponent's playing a bunch of basics, those forest cards or those mountains or swamps or plains or islands all have the same name. So if Echoing Ruin is on the field, we get to destroy a target artifact, and then we can destroy all the lands that player has of that type. Kind of mean, yes, but at the same time, this deck revolves around artifact destruction and a little bit of land destruction. Secrets. But with that being said, we also added cards like Liquid Metal Coating and Liquid Metal Torque. Both of these are 2 colorless. Liquid Metal Coating states target permanent becomes an artifact in addition to its other types until end of turn. Liquid Metal Torque will basically tap to add you a colorless, or you can tap it to target non-land permanent becomes an artifact in addition to its other types until end of turn. So basically with these 2 cards, one of them we can target whichever permanent, so we can target lands as well. And Liquid Metal Torque basically states we can target any non-land permanent. So with that being said, we are going to be destroying a lot of stuff. This little package right here is going to be really fun. And then last part of the package we have is Massive Nexus. It is 4 colorless. Creatures you control are every creature type. The same is true for creature spells you control and creature cards you own that aren't on the battlefield. So basically, we're just trying to make everything that we added to the deck that isn't an Aper Monkey an Aper Monkey. So definitely going to help us out in that aspect. We'll go ahead and get into some other fun stuff here. I did add 2 cards that are going to be fun for the deck. We are revolving around a bunch of +1/+1 counters. So obviously I added the Ozolith. Ozolith is 1 colorless. Whenever a creature you control leaves the battlefield, if it had counters on it, put those counters on the Ozolith. At the beginning of combat on your turn, if the Ozolith has counters on it, you may remove all counters from the Ozolith onto target creature. I'll be honest with you, basically running the deck and play testing it, when a bunch of board wipes are going on and you are putting a bunch of counters on this and it doesn't get removed, and you play a creature with haste and it just becomes massive. Absolutely massive. The Ozolith was an automatic include in this deck, and it's really fun to have in it. And then I also threw in Monkey Cage. It is 5 colorless. When a creature comes into play, sacrifice Monkey Cage and put into play any number of 2/2 green ape creature tokens equal to that creature's converted mana cost. So really fun card. We get to make a bunch of, green apes, and hopefully somebody plays a really big creature and we get to make a bunch of them. Next up, we have Magnetic Mind. It is 4 colorless. Whenever another artifact is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, Magnetic Mind deals 2 damage to that artifact's controller. Funny enough, we're going to have a lot of artifacts hitting people's graveyards, so we want them to get hurt. Now, granted, I know this does say it's going to hurt us too, essentially, but at the end of the day, we're probably going to be hurting more people on the other side of the board rather than us. So I think this was a good add. I also added Idol of Oblivion for 2 colorless. You can tap it, draw a card, activate only if you created a token this turn, and then you can pay 8, and then you can tap it, sacrifice it, create a 10/10 colorless Eldrazi creature token. The pay 8 cost is kind of fun, because you get a 10/10, but we're really doing this for card draw. So the good thing about Kibo is he taps and he creates you treasure tokens, and then we have other ways to create some treasure tokens in the deck. So this was definitely a fun little add to basically get us some card draw, filter through the deck a little bit, and hopefully get us to some more fun wins. And then the last 2 cards that I added that were artifacts were basically just some extra ramp for us. So I added Arcane Signet for 2 colorless. It has tap it, add 1 mana of any color in your commander's color identity. And then I also added Soul Ring. It costs 1, and you can tap it to add 2 colorless mana. 2 staples in any EDH deck, so I definitely had to throw these in here. And that'll basically wrap up all the artifacts that we added. We'll go ahead and get into the enchantments now. We'll go ahead and start off with Viridian Rebel. It is a colorless and 2 green for an enchantment. Whenever an artifact is put into an opponent's graveyard from the battlefield, you may draw a card. I've said it pretty much in almost every segment so far. Card draw wins you the game. If you guys take anything home from this deck tech, it is card draw will win you any game. We also have Titania's Song. 3 colorless and a green. Each non-creature artifact loses its abilities and becomes an artifact creature with power and toughness equal to its converted mana cost. If Titania's Song leaves the battlefield, this effect continues until end of turn. So it'll kind of help us with some artifact destruction, which will be really fun, and I thought it was a really cool card to add. We have Instill Energy for 1 green. You can enchant creature. enchanted creature has haste. And then for 0, you can untap enchanted creature, activate this ability only during your turn and only once each turn. So basically with Kibo, we can give it haste, we can tap it immediately, and then we can untap it and then tap it again. We get some extra bananas, we give our opponent some bananas, but hopefully we have our pieces on the board that enable them to not use them. I also added 4 fun cards. 2 of them are going to help us in some extra ramp, so we'll talk about those first. I added Wild Growth. It has 1 green. It has Enchant Land. Whenever enchanted land is tapped for mana, its controller adds an additional green. And then also Utopia Sprawl for 1 green. It has Enchant Forest. As Utopia Sprawl enters the battlefield, choose a color. Whenever Enchanted Forest is tapped for mana, its controller adds an additional 1 mana of the chosen color. Surprise, we'll probably choose red. I also added 2 really fun cards for some attacking fun. Invigorating Hot Springs for a colorless, a red, and a green. Invigorating Hot Springs enters the battlefield with 4 +1/+1 counters on it. It says modified creatures you control have haste, and then you can remove a +1/+1 counter from Invigorating Hot Springs, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control, activate only as a sorcery and once each turn. The once each turn thing is kind of a bummer, but we're putting a bunch of +1/+1 counters on our creatures anyways, so I don't think it really mattered too much. But just the fact that modified creatures have haste, basically anything we put down is going to come down. It'll basically be able to beat someone's face the second it hits the field, and that's what I love the most. And then I also added Rhythm of the Wild, kind of the same effect, but it is a colorless, a red, and a green. Creature spells you control can't be countered, which is amazing, because why would you want to counter any of the stuff that's going to help me win the game? It's not fun. And then it also has non-token creatures you control have Riot, so they can enter the battlefield with your choice of a +1/+1 counter or haste. So if this is on the field and Invigorating Hot Springs on the field, really fun, because essentially you can give them haste by putting a +1/+1 counter on it with Rhythm of the Wild, and with that counter on it, Invigorating Hot Springs will give it haste. So 2 fun cards to put on the field at the same time. And the last 3 cards I want to talk about are going to be kind of fun for the deck in general. I went ahead and added Quest for Renewal. Quest for Renewal is a colorless and a green. Whenever a creature you control becomes tapped, you may put a quest counter on Quest for Renewal. As long as there are 4 or more quest counters on Quest for Renewal, untap all creatures you control during each player's untap step. Now, we really don't have a lot of fun things that go with tapping our creatures, but the main reason why I do like this card is because it basically enables us to swing out with all of our creatures every single turn and not have the repercussions of blowback. So I want to be able to swing everything out. I want to hit somebody really hard. And at the next player's untap step, I want to be able to block all the stuff they're going to throw my way. So I thought this was a really fun addition into the deck. And obviously you can't have a +1/+1 themed deck without Hardened Scales. So Hardened Scales is 1 green. If 1 or more +1/+1 counters would be put onto a creature you control, that many +1/+1 counters are put on it instead. I don't think I really need to talk about that anymore. I think it's a standard in almost every +1/+1 counter deck. So we'll just move on to the last enchantment, which is probably be the game winner. I want to shout out Hunter real quick. Hunter kind of gave me the idea for this because I originally did not have it in the 100 list, but here we are. Beastmaster Ascension, 2 colorless and a green. Whenever a creature you control attacks, you may put a quest counter on Beastmaster Ascension. As long as Beastmaster Ascension has 7 or more quest counters on it, creatures you control get +5/+5. That's big. That's really big. I missed the card when I was first building it, and now that it's in here, it's gonna hurt people, and I'm really happy. Really happy. Overall, before we get into the lands, I think the deck is really fun because it kind of gives people choices, you know what I mean? So essentially, you have all these pieces on the board that are going to hurt people a lot, whether it's our artifacts, our enchantments, our creatures. And to be honest with you, it really is, you got to pick your poison, because you either destroy one thing and then you have this other thing you got to worry about. And you're constantly putting things on the board that they're going to have to deal with you. So this deck's going to bring a little hate. I'm not going to lie to you, but at the same time, I love it. Bring the hate. Please move on. So that'll wrap up all the enchantments. We'll go ahead and move on to the lands now. Went ahead and did something a little bit different from my last deck tech. Obviously with Titania, we did mono green, so I just threw in a crap ton of forests. This one will be a little bit different. I added a couple other different pieces for lands, so we'll go ahead and start into some of the colorless lands that can be a little fun. So I added War Room. You can tap it to add a colorless, or you can pay 3, tap it. You can pay life equal to the number of colors in your commander's color identity, and you can draw a card. So we pay 3, we lose 2 life, we get to draw a card. Do I think we'll be using this often? Not really, but if we're towards the end game, we dumped our hand, I definitely love the fact that we can still draw a card. I also added Kessig Wolf Run. You can tap it for a colorless, or it also has pay X, red, and a green. You can tap it, target creature gets +X/+0 and gains trample until end of turn. This one's really fun, because obviously we want to give anything trample, and it gets +X for that as well. It's going to run over somebody at that point. And then we also added a command tower, because, command tower is really fun. Can tap for red or green. It'll be really good. I added a Cinderglade. Cinderglade enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or more basic lands. We have plenty of basics in the deck, so this will definitely hopefully come in untapped. I also threw in a Treetop Village. Treetop Village enters the battlefield tapped, which is unfortunate, but you can tap it for a green, and for 1 colorless and a green, Treetop Village becomes a 3/3 green ape creature with trample until end of turn. It's still a land. So obviously we can make this a 3/3 green ape. It'll swing in with Kibo. Somebody will have to sacrifice something. We get to put a +1/+1 counter on it, and boom. Now you're growing a land, which is really funny. I also have Spire Garden in here. Spire Garden enters the battlefield tapped unless you have 2 or more opponents. Funny enough, we're playing Commander. Hopefully you don't draw this too late in the game after you beat the other 2 people, because let's face it, we're going to win the game. So this will tap for a red or a green. Karplusan Forest, it taps for a colorless, or you can tap it for a red and green, and then deals 1 damage to you. A little bit of pain for a little bit of payoff. And probably one of my favorite lands that I added in here was Firelit Thicket. Love it for the name. I think it's fun to say. But you can tap it for a colorless, or you can pay a green and a red. You can tap it. You can add double red, or you can add red and green, or double green. So pay 1, get 2. Kind of fun. Almost like a Soul Ring, but in the land form, which is kind of interesting. And you also got to pay 1 every time. So not really like a Soul Ring, but here we are now. I said it. And then the last kind of fun land that's not basic is going to be a Crag Crown Pathway. Obviously, Pathway, you can keep it on the red side, or you can keep it on the green side. Just kind of to see what you see what you need. What options you got? What do you got in your hand? I trust you guys. I gave you the deck tech. I gave you the options. You pick now. This is your choice. And then the last 2 things I added were basically snow-covered forests and snow-covered mountains. So I added 16 snow-covered forests, and I also added 11 snow-covered mountains. I know what you're thinking. Why did you add snow-covered forests and snow-covered mountains? Well, like I said earlier, with the Mycosynth out on the field, if we use the Echoing Ruin to destroy somebody's land, and we pick a mountain or a forest, I don't want it to hit us. So obviously, with it being a different name, it can't destroy our stuff. So that's why I went with the snow-covered. But that's it. That's it, man. We're done. We did it. You stuck around with me, and I appreciate it. You guys are awesome. But since you stuck around with me so long, why not do me a favor? Why don't you go into the comments? Tell me what you think. Did you like the deck? Were there cards you would have added? Were there cards that you kind of don't really like too much? What would you have swapped out? I kind of want to hear your opinions. This is really fun for me doing the deck techs. I really do love the input and feedback you guys are giving us as well. Kind of helps me become a better deck techer, I guess you could say. Not like the little skateboards we used to play with in like high school, but you know what I mean. You know what I mean. But other than that, we'll call it here. If you guys did like the video, don't forget to like it. We put out a bunch of fun stuff all the time, and I don't want you to miss it. So I also want you to go down, hit that subscribe button, and maybe hit the bell. You hit the bell to let you know whenever we put out cool content, and you can watch it immediately. Why wouldn't you want that? Also, don't forget to check out all of our socials. We're on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter at Guys That Magic for everything. And until the next video, guys, thank you so much, and take care.